Great Scott! You're listening to the Growth Time Machine with Daniel Curtis. Don't forget to follow. Your future depends on it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Growth Time Machine. I am joined by Jon Symes all the way from California. I am delighted, Jon, to have you with me. Thanks for being part of this.
It's a pleasure. My roots are right where you are now. My dad was born in South Wales.
Really?
I'm a long way from there right now, but I feel connected.
Where was your dad? Where was he from?
Well, as best I understand, he was born in Swansea, and
Okay.
I don't know in more detail than that. And within a few months, his mum and dad had moved to Dorset. So he didn't spend long there, but he was always very proud that he was born in Wales.
So I am around about half an hour out of Swansea, 30 minutes, something like that. Not very far at all. Maybe that's a bit ambitious. Take a little bit longer, but not loads longer. And Dorset's also a very beautiful place. Well, it's nice to have someone who's got some roots, and we'll maybe dive into that in a few moments' time. But the first question I'm going to ask you is, when you were a little boy, what was the first idea you ever had for a job? What was that in your world? What was that?
I don't know if I ever went around with that sort of saying that we attribute to kids, like, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. But I remember really clearly sitting in my grandparents' home, reading a book that had been given to me by my grandma. That generation were hugely shaped by the two wars they'd lived through. And the book that she gave me to read was called Reach for the Sky. And it was the story of Douglas Bader, who was, and I don't know if you know that story, but Douglas Bader was this larger-than-life figure. Before the Second World War, he'd joined the RAF. He was the daring young man in a jumpsuit flying around he was exceptionally good at sport. It was predicted that he would go on to represent England at rugby and at cricket. And he was in the aerobatics team. And I read about this guy, and he seemed to embody everything that I thought was wonderful. Shortly before the war happened, he had a crash. He flipped his plane, crashed his plane, showing off, it seems, and he lost both legs. And so he had to adjust to living with two artificial legs, but talked his way back into the RAF, operated at quite a high level in the RAF during the Battle of Britain, was eventually shot down over France and captured by the Germans, imprisoned in Colditz, the high security prison, from which he tried to escape on two tin legs. And so as I don't know, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old or 7, I'm reading this book. Here's this enormously larger than life figure who seems to be good at everything he touches. And according to the autobiography, at least, everybody loved him. And that was the first sense I had of who I might be in the world. That was very, very clear to me. Yeah.
So if we pick out the kind of roots of that story, you've got someone there who's obviously got a lot of charisma, you would think. Someone who was very resilient, incredibly resilient. Someone who, wasn't afraid to kind of live their life despite, setbacks. And, there's a lot of interesting qualities that you could pick out of that story. And, the escape things. I mean, I was just talking to you off air, wasn't I, about, ever since I was a child, the Alcatraz escape was something that has fascinated me. And you're not too far away from San Francisco there. Yeah. And, when you mentioned Colditz, there were some incredible escape stories about that place. People did ridiculous things to get out of there. It's a really fascinating place. I'm not surprised that story captured you. And do you know what? I'll be honest, never heard of it. But that is very, very interesting. And I'm going to look up more genuinely about that person.
Well, we're different generations. So, I was raised by grandparents and parents who'd lived through the war. You're a step removed from it, I suspect, and it'll have less immediacy. But yeah, we were still living in the stories of our wartime heroes.
But what I will say is, I was brought up mainly with my grandparents, so I'm surprised I've not come across that one. But that's interesting. I'm always happy to learn something new. Just down the road here, literally half a mile, a prisoner of war camp was here in Bridgend, and it was a very famous escape. They had a lot of officers of the Third Reich came here, both during the war and after the war, whilst they were waiting to basically be put on trial. And what happened was they escaped. They built a false wall and dug a tunnel out, and they went roaming around Wales, and some of them got into England, and it was the biggest escape here in Britain. It happened literally across the road from where we are now.
Wow!
So interesting things happen, and so I'm interested to go forward. So you obviously had it wasn't necessarily a job, but you certainly identified a character, a kind of interesting person who had these, incredible qualities. What was the first kind of real job you ever had?
Well, I was a paper boy at the age of 12. I don't know if that counts.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Various other jobs while I was still at school. The first job I had, sort of outside of the period when I was at school, was so what happened is I as a young guy, as a schoolboy, I was bright in maths and sciences. And so the career advice I got was study engineering, get yourself into a good company, and your career will move from there. And I didn't really know enough to argue with that. So I ended up applying for an engineering degree at Imperial College in London, which is certainly was, I think still is, the premier engineering college in the UK.
Yeah, it is. Very much so.
They had a fascinating new degree there, which required that you were sponsored by a company. And there were only a limited number of companies that they had this arrangement with. And I applied to several, and I was selected to be sponsored by Imperial Chemical Industries, ICI, which used to be a huge name in the UK. That company's broken up into 1,000 fragments, and you scarcely see the name anywhere except on a paint tin these days. But it was a very prestigious sponsorship to get. So I at 18, I spent a year in a sort of a pre-university engineering training role with ICI in Runcorn in Cheshire. Then I went to university for 3 years at Imperial, and I came out and I went back and worked for ICI. So that was the first job I had, and it was that year before university was a whole mix of some of it was carrying a fitter's tool bag around the factory. Some of it was learning how to use the engineering machinery in the shop. Some of it was studying other topics, and a lot of it was growing up and learning about life. So when a year later, when I went to university, those of us that had spent a year out in the big wide world before we got to university, instead of going straight from sixth form to university, there seemed to be this sort of huge difference between us that had been afforded by having spent a year in the real world. So that was my first experience of working. Yeah, and I was probably being paid £2,000 a year or something, which seemed a princely sum to me at 18.
Yeah. I can imagine, and a lot more than the paper round. Unquestionable.
Yes.
Oh, those were the days. But yeah, I think, I mean, you did an incredibly sensible thing. Going into a genuine craft and trade, engineering, going down that route. I mean, you had a, very high profile company sponsor you. And Imperial is still one of the leading examples of medicine and, also engineering and I'm sure many other things.
Yeah.
That name still means something incredible. So the 18-year-old kind of thrown into a man's world, into a world full of, people I'm sure who've been doing it a long time in a particular industry.
Yeah.
What did that inspire you to do then? So you went through that degree, you went back to the sponsor company. Where did that lead you?
I discovered within about 6 months that I was not cut out to be an engineer.
Okay.
That the life of an engineer inside a company like that just wasn't me. I wasn't sufficiently interested. I didn't think in quite that same logical way that serves engineers so well. And within about 6 months, I was asking for a transfer inside the company. They declined. They said, no, we hired you for an engineering role. That's what we see you in. So I went and got a job with another company as, if I remember rightly, I think I was something like an assistant product manager in the marketing department of an industrial adhesives company. And I told my boss at ICI I was leaving, and he said, you can't leave. I said, well, I asked you for a transfer and you couldn't oblige, so I've got another job. He said, well, let me see if I can pull a few strings, which presumably he hadn't pulled strings earlier. And he got me an interview with the sales director, who was this older gentleman, terribly well spoken, who I'm sure spent the first 5 minutes of our conversation checking to see whether I'd got any oil underneath my fingernails, having come from the chemical plant. And finally he asked me, he said, well, what would you say, Symes, if I was to offer you a job as, I don't know, let's say a sales representative in, for the sake of argument, let's say the north of Scotland. And I gave him my interview enthusiasm. I said, oh, that sounds wonderful. And as slowly a smile spread across his face, and he said, well, Symes, the job's yours. You start next week. And I was off to Scotland as a sales rep. So that was great. So actually I stayed with ICI for nearly 10 years through a progression of their commercial roles, product management, sales, buying, those kind of roles. And I got a huge experience. I got a great experience in how big companies work, how people work. This was back in the day when business was being done in a much more colorful way than it was now. The business lunch was still a thing. The business trip was still exciting. I learned a huge amount in those days. Very, very valuable. Very fun.
So I'm going to just go back ever so slightly to that moment where you've gone through. I mean, I imagine the degree was 3 years, I think you said. Was that about right?
Yeah.
You'd spent a year before doing the degree. You'd gone back afterwards into the engineering world. A lot of people who listen to this show and in life in general get onto a path, a road, and they're actually pretty good at what they do. They may not be, let's say, in a state of flow, in the zone, happy, inspired, all of those things, but actually technically capable of doing the job. And lots of people, maybe they're not that capable, but they still do it and they bumble through, They do the best they can do and with the skills they've got, and, they're kind of blagging life. They're just getting through the day.
Yeah.
But what on earth was going on in your mind at that moment where you were like, this isn't right? What made you go, I'm actually going to do something about it? Because a lot of people would have just continued with that career. And I imagine, just from speaking to you here, that you were technically competent at it. It may not have been your quest of life. It may not have been that thing. But what made you go, no, not for me, and I'm going to go somewhere else? I'm going to pursue something else.
I like that question. I don't know how to articulate what it was, other than that there was some aspect of me, some of the story I had about life was that there were possibilities there to be found, and I wasn't. I was partly in co-creation of my own life. I already understood that to a degree. It landed with me much more heavily a few years later, but I already understood that I was partly responsible for shaping my life, so I wasn't going to settle for what didn't work. Yeah.
Can we go back to your parents? What kind of influence did they have on you? What did they do as well? What was their
Yeah,
life's
Mum and
work?
Dad were both teachers, and teachers in a somewhat old-fashioned, what we'd now see to be quite an old-fashioned way. And we were raised with completing a good education and getting a good job very clearly as that was their intent for us. And I have a brother and 3 sisters, so us is a crew of 5 kids, and we were all pushed, coached, sometimes a little more heavily than we wanted to be. When you get home from school and you're still being asked questions around the family dinner table about school, in that way that school teachers can. Sometimes it's a bit more than you need, but there was they were kind, they were loving, they had our best intentions at heart. They were religious, so we were a church family. I sang in the church choir. Until, I don't know, mid-teens, I realized that particular form of religious activity wasn't for me, but it meant that we'd grown up with a sense of values, a sense of what Christian ideals are, which, whether you're Christian or not, the ideals of being kind, helping your neighbor, loving others, contributing to the greater good. I mean, that one particularly strikes me as a legacy of my upbringing, and that's shaped some of quite a few of my decisions, actually. So I grew up in that kind of environment. Yeah.
Now I know that the listeners of this will tell me off if I do not ask you, what was it around 13 years old that made you think that environment? Because that's an interesting statement. The environment of the church. I mean, and I'm wondering if it was faith in general you were struggling with, whether you were just at an age where you wanted to do other things, or whether you thought that the teaching, the messages were not in line with, the way you were thinking. I'm wondering, if you could maybe just explain that, because I have a lot of people who genuinely struggle with faith, and we have those conversations here. Some people who have gone out of faith, back into faith, stepped away from it. Some people who believe, with all of their heart. But what's interesting is, how sometimes, not always, people reject the church, but not Jesus. They reject the setting and some of the teaching. I'm wondering what that was. And, it's very personal. I'm just wondering, what struck you at that age?
Yeah, I think there were probably 2 factors. One is there was some active rebellion going on. There was some way of me disassociating myself from my folks. Particularly, we lived in a school boarding house. Mum and Dad were the housemasters in the school boarding house. So we were on the school grounds. We had 40 boys between the age of 12 and 18 living in the house as well. And my dad was a large figure in the school. And in some ways, I just wanted to be myself somewhere else. And I'm sure that was the largest part of it. I've never returned to practicing Christianity, but I have a very strong sense that there is a world larger than us, in a benevolent universe. I believe it to be, and I explore it. I try to align with it in different ways, in practices that I've built up myself over the years. So it's not as if faith has disappeared from my life at all, but in that particular shape, it didn't go much beyond my mid-teens. No.
Was it a cathedral school? Because you mentioned the choir and different things. Was it a cathedral base, or was it a church choir? As in because I know how hard they work. Some in cathedrals, for instance.
It was a local church choir I was in. I think we did once sing in Worcester Cathedral, which was probably the high point of my career as a chorister. But then we moved to another town when I was about 12, and I didn't join a church choir there. We didn't affiliate with a particular church because, well, for all sorts of reasons. But no, singing in the choir wasn't quite as important as it might have sounded.
So you spent 10 years with the obviously the company, who obviously did the engineering, but also you had that sales role that you kind of developed.
Yeah.
Was that a very important moment in your life, or did it lead somewhere else that, became more important?
The fascinating thing was that, which did turn out to shape my life, was that, as a management trainee inside a large company, I was exposed to quite a lot of training programs, development programs, and so on. And I remember attending training courses with a great excitement and the dawning realization that we have the levers of our own lives in our hands. That's what I got from being put into training courses in my mid-20s there. It was like, geez, I have the capacity to influence, to shape, to direct my own life. That arrived with me with such a clarity that it really possessed me. And I decided that I wanted to be involved in that field. And so I was able to leave ICE. I trained myself in some skills. If you were in the applied psychology field, you might know of neuro-linguistic programming, which is a particular way of studying what makes some people effective and studying them so that you can teach what makes people effective to other people. So I trained up in that, and I was fairly quickly able to not only get work as a trainer, but then eventually to become a consultant and to hire other people to support me and to grow the team of consultants. And over the next 15 years, we were working with some of the largest global companies, offering them training, executive mentoring, team building, cultural change programs, a whole fascinating variety of work, because I discovered that I wanted to be involved in the realm of transformation. That's what excited me. And so I did. I jumped into that with both feet and became quite successful doing it.
So was the NLP, was that crucial in the early phase, or was that something that stayed constant? Was all of your stuff rooted in that, or was that just something you trained and then became a trainer in, and then later expanded into other things?
It was almost like it became the vocabulary of my work.
Okay. Understood.
Rather than something I sold. I remember going to see one person, and a prospective customer, an HR director of an organization, and I told him how experienced I was in neuro-linguistic programming, and I saw the lights go out in his eyes immediately. And I thought, I don't need to lead with that. So it was really the label on the tools in my bag rather than anything else.
Understood. And obviously you'd been experienced in sales because you'd gone up to Bonnie, Scotland, and trekked around, and I'm imagining a lot of countryside at times. But setting up your own, kind of enterprise and hiring people and running these training courses, how did you get the buy-in from companies? Because there are thousands of trainers out there. What do you think was the thing that made you stand out? And maybe it was the neuro-linguistic programming, but I'm sure it was you and facets of the way you sold yourself and the business. I'm just wondering what you thought were the key bits that made one company go, you're our person, over all of the others, because it's an incredibly competitive industry.
Yeah, I think the different stages, to get in the door, sometimes you need to have big names on your roster. So if you've already got customers who are well-known world-leading companies, then it's easier to get into the conversation with the next one. But the place I always tried to end up and often did was to be the trusted confidant of the decision maker. And I didn't even have that language for it, but I knew that if I built rapport with that person or people, and that if I understood their business, that I could rely on my own ability to see and articulate possible ways of solving their problems. And so eventually I wasn't selling very much at all, but I was fielding phone calls from people who'd say, John, I've got a problem with our management team in Rome. I'd like your thoughts. And so that sort of trusted advisory role was the place from which the business really began to grow, because people trusted me, the work I'd done in the past, the work my team had done in the past, and then work continued to flow. Yeah.
How did you get that first big company, though? How did you manage to get that to even begin to grow?
A guy called Roy Johnson took a risk, took a chance on putting me in front of some of his customers. And when I did a good job, he rewarded me by putting me in front of other customers. And then at a certain point, he was looking to step back from some of the work that he did. I was probably aged 30. He's a couple of decades older than me and was looking to take on less work. And he offered me one of his customers. He said, why don't you pay me something to take over being the principal, to being the supplier at this company, where I was already the voice and the sales and delivery guy. So we arranged a fee which was approximately what I would earn from running one 3-day program with them. So I went and ran a 3-day program, gave all of that money to Roy. He was happy, and I had the customer, and I grew that business hugely over the next 10 years.
Interesting.
So there were people that helped me along the way who trusted me and pointed me in good directions. Yeah, that's an important part of the story.
So you obviously spent a lot of your career trying to transform people. Transformation is the word that you mentioned, which is a fascinating word, which, if we look at a definition, to transform, we could use the word change. To, we're changing into something where that could be values, that could be beliefs, that could be many things. What underpinned your work? What is it really at heart that you believed people needed transformation for? What were people missing? What did they need? What did you identify that you could help with?
Well, the answer to that is hugely context dependent. So in all of the work I was doing in those days was in the realm of corporate. And so the context was, can we make these people or this person perform better within the scope of the role they have and the scope of the activities of the company? And so early doors, the underpinning was helping people get better at what they did. But it's super interesting because transformation is not the same as change. In some ways of defining it, change tends to be linear, and what you're changing to can often be predicted by where you've come from. So if you think about a child growing over the first 18 years of their life, that's a process of change. There's no transformation involved. Transformation suggests that the state you arrive in is not at all predictable from the state you departed. And so we think about caterpillars and butterflies. You look at a caterpillar and there's nothing there that would predict butterfly. And yet what happens inside the cocoon is a process of transformation. And so I don't know that I was really involved in transformation inside the corporate world because people they want to be better within the established story of what's going on. They don't necessarily want a new story. And that ultimately became my frustration. And at a certain point, aged in my early 40s, I came to the conclusion that if I carried on as I would, my legacy would be that I'd helped organizations be more effective in the world at the same time as the world as we knew it was hugely challenged. I'm taking us back to 2002, 2003 now, where the first glimpses of the climate crisis were certainly there. We could see the inequality in the world. We could see the ways in which we were degrading and poisoning the environment. So it was easy to see that continued unchecked, we, the human species, are heading in a dangerous direction. And I didn't want to just live inside of that moment in time, this moment in time, because that is still the case. I don't want to live inside this moment in time and just grease the wheels on the corporate train if it is contributing to our demise. Now, whether or not I agree with that, whether or not you agree with that, is a moot point. I just knew that I had to do something different. And I was blessed because my consulting had rewarded me quite well. I was able to take what amounted to a couple of years of sabbatical. And I sat in that sabbatical with the prayer. Interestingly, we talked about church before.
We did.
Faith reflected in prayer, but not in attendance at the C of E round the corner. My prayer was, show me how I can make a difference with the experience and skills that I've got. And the answer that came to me in that space over a couple of years was to write a book. And I wrote a book called Your Planet Needs You, a complete departure from any of the consulting work I've been doing before, and a handbook for people like you and me, and probably written mostly for me, to look at how we could contribute to the world being different. And so I wrote that book as having kind of received that that's the work I should do. And I prepared myself to start traveling around the UK talking about this whole new area of my now passion, that we want to change the way we live in order to protect the future of our children and their children.
Could you, when you say the way we live, are we talking environmentally, as in looking after the planet, or is this also about the way we live, personal, or is it very specifically, that those kind of environmental impacts and the impacts that we have on the earth by being here?
Well, in my earliest writings on this, and what you'll find in that book, the easiest place to focus is to see the environment, because we can see it quite easily. We can comment on it without much risk to ourselves. But if we fast forward the story, I end up working for an organization whose articulation of the goal I think is worth repeating here, because it answers your question very directly. The writing of that book got me hired by an organization in San Francisco called the Pachamama Alliance, a nonprofit whose mission was to change the conversation in the world about our future.
Okay.
And the mission statement of some of the work there was, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it slowly because it's a very dense but very beautiful sentence, bringing about a human presence on planet Earth which is environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just. And what that sentence does is it completely names how those three elements, the spirit, the environment, and the social and society, how interlinked they are, and how we can't really talk about having a greener planet without talking about how to have a fairer environment for those of us that live on the planet. And we can't look at that without addressing our own sense of conscience, our own awareness of what is, what's right and what's wrong, and the spiritual dimension of our lives comes into play. So I began to see how those three are so inextricably entwined.
Yeah, I mean, it is a beautiful sentence. And it's one that is, well, it's something you could almost study, actually. Genuinely, you could study that sentence and for a long time and come up with, lots of ideas of what each element of that kind of, means. That's a whole day training right there, just kind of breaking that down.
Yeah.
But, obviously this organization, had a very, we could call it ambitious, we could call it visionary. What was the nuts and bolts of being in that operation? What was you doing?
Well, listen, there's you're all, Daniel, you're all about stories. The story of that organization is worth repeating, and I'll try and condense it because it's a long and beautiful tale. But there are a tribe of people called the Achua people who live in the rainforest in Ecuador, whose back in the 60s, there was exploitation of rubber and oil in their territory, and then it went quiet. And then in the 90s, the oil companies started to come back. And the Achua they're a dream culture, and which means that they listen to their dreams for guidance. And the dreams of the elders in that nation which is a nation of not more than 15,000 people in the rainforest. Their dreams said, reach out and make partnership with the world that's coming towards you instead of standing against it with your machete.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they did, and they sent out in the dream world a call for help, which was picked up in the dream world by two people I now know very well indeed, who separately both started having strange dreams that featured the Indian-looking face and the distinctive red and yellow headband worn by the Achua people, and were eventually able to decipher that they were being called to get into connection with these people. And they visited Ecuador, and they were asked to help the Achua protect themselves in their land in the forests of the Ecuadorian, the Amazonian rainforest there. And so the origins of the Pachamama Alliance is in this mystical connection between jungle dwellers and the world we call civilized. And so the Pachamama Alliance was born and started funding the ability of the Achua to protect their territory in the legal environment of Ecuador. But then the actuary said, but listen, the trouble we have here in Ecuador, the reason the oil companies are coming here to drill underneath our homes is because of the way you live in the rest of the world. Why don't you do something about that? And in the language of the dream culture they are, their request was go and change the dream the rest of the world is living in. Mm. Well, there's scarcely a bigger job available on planet Earth.
I agree with that.
Than to change the direction of our culture. And to their credit, the founders of the Pachamama Alliance decided that they would try and they would make whatever attempt they could. And I joined that attempt in 2006, 2007 I came here, 2007, and I became the program director, taking the message around the world. We can wake up out of the dream that we're in and move towards, yes, an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence if we choose to. And I spent nearly 10 years doing that inside this amazing, ambitious, bold, you could say crazy, you could say you could say misguided, you could throw all sorts of criticism at it, but here were people who decided that they wanted to try to bring more people into a conversation about the future of us as a species. And to their great success, we were able to bring many people into that conversation, and all sorts of different initiatives were spun off out of those people that heard that call and responded.
Did you find that fulfilling?
Most fulfilling period of my life until now. The most fulfilling work to be involved in, something that seems to have purpose, that seems to align very deeply with my own values, into which I could put the skills and experience I'd already gathered to very good use, meeting the most amazing people, or meeting people in whom we could find the most amazing parts of ourselves. Because, one of the things I concluded from that, Daniel, is that there is a part inside almost all of us that wants a healthy future for our kids and their kids. There is a part of us that wants to bring our genius out into the world, because we each have a music to play in the great symphonic expression of human life. And I got to meet people who were finding that, who wanted help finding that, and then what you find is we are like-minded in our desire to protect life and to protect the future.
So you spent 10 years in a very idealistic, I would not call it misguided, I would call it idealistic. It's a lovely way. It's a dream, right? It's a dream.
Yeah.
And you're essentially trying to make more and more people care about that dream, be part of that dream, open up the conversations about that dream.
Perfect.
And it's interesting. Obviously, you were talking about dreams specifically, as in the kind of sleep state dreams with the Ecuadorian kind of tribe there. But yeah, listen. I mean, a lot of people have started with the words, I have a dream, right? It's one of the most famous speeches of all time. And that wasn't, I've got it all together and I know exactly what's going to happen. It's, I have a dream. It's a vision. So, I commend you wholeheartedly for investing in something that unquestionably the world needs. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt. I mean, some people may doubt that the world needs that, but that's for them and their own conscience and to contend with. But science doesn't back up the theory that we are doing tremendously and the world is in a safe place. Science doesn't back that up. So I'm going to stick with science here. And Sir David Attenborough, who knows everything. If Sir David Attenborough says it, I'm game. I trust that man. He said if all the humans, didn't exist on the earth, the world and the planet would thrive. All of life in terms of, plants, trees, the pollution, all of it would correct itself. So, we're obviously doing something, aren't we? You know?
Yes. Yes.
I trust that man. He
Yes.
is our.
Yeah.
But so 10 years there. Did that conclude itself? What was it? The end of? Did you go into retirement there? What happened?
No, that kind of concluded itself. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but sometimes, that one person can have a period inside an organization where their ideas and their contribution have value and are very, very much valued. And then things change, and we moved on, and I felt that I'd given what I could to that particular organization and was grateful. And my then wife and I opened ourselves up to the next possibility, which itself arrived in a fairly unusual way. When we went out for breakfast over here in the States, Thanksgiving Day is a Thursday in November. And we went out for brunch that morning, and I went to the counter to order the food, and I got back to table, and my wife said, "We're moving to Peru."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, tell me more about that." And she just had a very clear vision, or in fact, she heard it as a voice, not a vision. A voice so clear that she looked around to see if somebody was speaking in her ear, and she'd heard this voice say, "You're moving to Peru." And I don't know how this sounds to listeners. It might sound very woo-woo. But the way we lived and our worldview, and you might say our faith, to come back to that, was such that to us made perfect sense. And so we engaged with the idea of moving to Peru, and by the end of the day, we decided we would. And we knew one woman in Peru, a dear friend, a medicine woman we'd known for years. We phoned her, or Zoomed her, I think we probably did. She was in, which itself was remarkable. And we said, "Can we come and stay with you?" And she said, "Yes." And we said, "No, I think we mean, can we come and live with you?" And she said, "I know, yes." I said, "Well, how do you know?" She said, "I've been expecting you for a while." So,
okay.
So we decided to move to Peru. And the following Monday, I handed in my resignation, and we started selling up or actually giving away anything that we owned, so that we could take 2 suitcases each and go on a one-way ticket to Peru. In the period between deciding to do that and our departure, which was the following January, we were approached by a couple of people here in California who said, we know about the work of the Pachamama Alliance. We know that you're going to Peru. You might be interested in this business model that we have. And what they'd been doing in West Africa and some other places is they'd been creating trading opportunities for indigenous groups to collect and sell crops available on their land that had a market beyond the local area.
Okay.
And which they weren't able to access on their own. And so what would happen is that this couple would help them make the connections and help them sell a crop that had little value locally, but was used to make life jacket fillings in a factory in China, or a fire retardant in Germany. And they said, you might take that idea to Ecuador and Peru. And we agreed that we would. It seemed as if that backfit the reason why we'd been told to move there. And so we embarked not only on a new adventure, but a new adventure that had a plan to develop a social venture that would advantage those Achua people and others. And we set about trying to do that we lived in Peru for about a month, but then quickly moved to Quito in Ecuador, which is a neighboring country. And we lived there and began the process of opening up bank accounts and getting visas and doing all the things we needed to be running that business there. Oh, gosh. The next 12 months were an ordeal and were the hardest period of our lives in many ways, because as we went further and further into this, and as we'd committed more and more to it, and as we'd put our reputation on the line and our own relationships on the line, the two Americans back in California started failing to send through the money to pay the bills. And we ended up, after 12 months, it was super clear that we'd been set, well, whether we were set up initially or not, we'd certainly been let down, betrayed even. And we were stuck with a business that didn't work because we had no money to make it happen. In a foreign country where the culture was alien to us and we hadn't yet become fluent in the language. And we were marooned. The two of us were marooned, and we had virtually zero savings. There were some kind souls sent us money to help us get through the period and buy the tickets that would get us out of Ecuador. And so it was a hugely difficult time. And it's taken, I would say, most of the period since then, the last 10 years, in some ways, most of the period to recover from that. It's taken us a long time to recover. And here we are, having learned, I mean, in my case, having learned an enormous amount about myself and an enormous amount that I'm now using in the work that I do, and is now finding its way into a book that I'm writing. This book will be called The Stories That Are Killing Us. And it's about, well, the focus of my work has become, what stories do we live in? You know, a few minutes ago, we were talking about dreams as a context in which we live. We live in the context of the dreams we hold. Well, I think it's equally true to say we live in the context of the stories that we hold.
I agree wholeheartedly with that.
As a storyteller, I'm sure you do. And so my work now, Daniel, has come all the way around to being focused on choosing the stories that we live and operate out of.
Yeah, my book, which is coming out in November, is called Who Were You Before the World Told You Who to Be? It's all about,
Love it.
The labels and stories, and it's very focused on that. Jon, I want to pick up on something before we come to a conclusion. Your wife, I mean, did that had a massive strain? There's no question. That must have been incredibly difficult. The relationship, you were let down, fundamentally let down.
Yeah.
Possibly set up, and it doesn't matter either way, actually. It still happened. And that's on their conscience and for them to deal with. But what, can you give us a couple of minutes on that? The devastation that had on your life, that must have been horrific.
For the first 50 years of my life, I was blessed that I'd never really met disappointment on a big scale. I was blessed that I'd been able to do well in most every environment I found myself in. I'd never really been significantly out of my depth or unable. And so the feeling of being in another country where everybody else was visibly different, linguistically different, culturally different, it was already quite straining to find myself. This opens up a whole different topic we probably can't explore, but as a white, educated man, I, in my life, hadn't been many places where that wasn't currency. It didn't work for me in much of my experience in Ecuador, certainly not to anything like the extent it does, in normal life. Then to find yourself without money, without means to make money, and to find yourself embarrassed to admit to people who you have asked for help already, who have been trying to support you, to admit failure. This was all new experience to me, and deeply troubling. And I can point to the years it took me to really work my way through it. What I now am able to see is all of the stories that I was living in, the narratives I used to shape my life, were either challenged or terminated in Ecuador. And the stories of my own capability, of my capacity to make things happen, of my capacity to feel good, all of those things went away. And so I found myself inside a bunch of stories which weren't sufficient for the moment I was living in. And it took me a long time, a lot of reflection to see what that took from me, and the confidence it took from me, and the assurance it took from me, and the way it challenged my faith. And it's been a long road back to the recovery of those things. Yeah.
You were ashamed, Jon. Is that fair? You were ashamed of what happened, and
yes,
asking for help.
Yeah, we left this area of California to go to Ecuador. I remember we had 2 or 3 events that sent us off where, like, tens of people would gather and hear what we were planning to do, and would send us off with good wishes. And when we came back, I had the distinct memory that I wanted to avoid encountering any of those people, because I couldn't look them in the eye and say, you sent us off in this way, and we failed, and we're broke, and it was very humbling, and shame and embarrassment were big parts of it.
You've been incredibly successful in your life. You really have. You went to one of the best schools, kind of colleges, universities you could go to. You've made a very successful career in terms of the training, going into very aspirational aims, and you went out there because you felt guided. You went out there to try and help local people. I mean, you were in the kind of the company in San Francisco trying to help the tribes and the local people, and you again went out and tried to help the local people, and you have made it back here now. You are in a different place in your life where you're creating a new book based in part because of the experiences that you had. Those experiences have given you a completely new narrative, a new desire to write something that is going to help countless people. And it's incredibly hard to put things together looking forward. Sometimes you can only do that, right? When you look back. And maybe you're not even at that point yet, where you can look back and see how it all fits together. But I truly believe that it will, if it's not starting to make sense, it will make sense. And
I'm grateful for that. I think it's begun to make sense, and the very process I'm in right now of writing is perhaps the final element of the catharsis that comes from actually owning what happened, being able to talk about what happened, and distill the lessons from it and move beyond it. So that's
I'm going to ask 2 things of you.
Right.
First thing, when your new book is completed and you're ready to speak to the world, it would be my honor if you'd come on and talk to me again, and we really deep dive into that and that process. I would dearly love that, because I think we've done half a conversation, and I could spend another hour easily talking to you about a lot of other things. So I hope we can reconnect, and I also hope we can keep in contact. I'd be really interested to hear how everything goes, and to support your work as well and what you do, because your story is incredible. It really is. It's very inspiring to listen to, and I know that we've touched the surface of things, and never doubt the impact that you have had and continue to have. There are people who are better because you have existed on this planet. Never forget that.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I accept your invitation. I'll be back.
I'm glad you did.
I'll be back. Yes.
Would you complete our show today with whatever's on your heart? If there's a piece of advice, whatever it may be, maybe you can give us whatever is there right now.
I'm going to read a poem if I can.
Amazing. Let's do it.
1 second.
Of course.
So, this is a poem that I wrote to try to make sense of some of what I experience in the world.
Sure.
Some of what I experience in the world is that we individually are remembering, coming back into some sense of our own authentic truth. I think you know that because the title of your book says that. And so, in some way, I think about each of us as humans coming back into, reclaiming, re-embodying, remembering who we are. And
Beautiful.
that process is often, I've become familiar with the process of stimulating that healing with various sacred plants and medicines from different parts of the world. And so this is a distillation of what I've observed, and it's something of a summary of my worldview, if I could say that. It's a poem. It's called No Blind Watchmaker.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to your healing, for slashing at the knotted cords within, for shining light in the shadowed corners, healing the wounds that run in families and nations, and for remembering who you really are. Your quest serves us all. Thank you, Pachamama, Mother Earth, for calling us with the plants that offer us their medicine, the crystals surfacing to guide us home, the comets returning to draw our eyes to the heavens, and your irrepressible beauty. No blind watchmaker could assemble such majesty by strange chance or random act. Rather, a conspiracy of cosmic scale unfolds through us in this quiet corner of the Milky Way, one precious possibility amongst galaxies galore. Our planet needs us, if we can hear her call, to come home again, to come whole again, to sing our song in harmony with this unfolding. Our dissonant voices have drowned out her whispers. We've shunned her calling for too long. Forgive us, please, our stumbling ways, the hubris of this species in vain attempt to extricate itself from the web of life. It may just be that the great dream of evolving creation is that we come reverent and wise enough to offer our planet home as the next ascension of this spiral. So friends, gaze a while at a star-filled sky and know you are as perfectly placed as every other source of life. Gather the courage to find humble step with the implicate order. Gift such offerings and reparations as may help us realize that dream, seated as surely in your heart as in the knowing of the stars. Yes, with each certain step towards your healing, the earth sighs, the stars dance, and the cosmos smiles.
That's beautiful. That's incredible. Honestly, that's beautiful. And I think it's a beautiful way to end. So thank you for sharing that. Truly, I'm very humbled to hear that. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for doing the things that you've done. Thank you for truly trying to help the world we live in, which is the only world we have, right?
It is.
Go forth, my friend, with the promise always of possibility, and we will talk again. But rest assured, you've made your impact, and you're not done. You're not done. So take care of yourself. And it's been wonderful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I love your the space that you've created, and I feel very seen, very heard. And I hope what you've revealed with your questioning and your stewardship of this space is helpful to listeners all around the world. I really hope that.
Thank you, sir. It means a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's been an honor to get to know you. So I'm humbled by that too. So thank you so much. We will catch up again. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.